as everybody knows, I'm a serious dog person. So this year, most of the papers are on cats. Okay. And there are some pretty cool cat data. So there are 5 cat papers, 3 dog papers, and 1 paper that addresses both. And for those of you who are interested in what Prince Edward Island looks like, this is the view from my deck. And this was on the vernal equinox. Okay. So, this is a paper from Animal Welfare called Cats Just Want to Have Fun, Associations Between Play and Welfare in Cats. And it's out of a group in Australia. And this group sought to identify and assess whether play itself in quantity or quality, and it looks like my laser pointer is going to work this week, and relationships with guardians was associated with any welfare measures that they could construct for cats. And they used 4 different potential welfare measures. They used cat quality of life scores. These are based on a very similar score to the Monash scores. They used a quality of the cat guardian relationship score. They looked at reported behavioral problems as reported by the guardians, and they looked at guardian observations of behavioral changes when play was absent. And their hypothesis was that assessment of higher play times, the more you play, and the better you play, should be positively associated with welfare measures. Now, this was a survey, okay, and it was completed by 1,591 guardians from 55 countries. So how did they actually do this? And this is a paraphrase of their very, very, very detailed instructions. They used 2 measures of quality of life, the feline quality of life measure and cat ownership relationship scale, and only participants who completed all sets of the questions were included. So they had to have at most people complete most everything, and 98% of the full survey was included in the final analysis. 18 reported behavior problems were reduced to 7 components using a principal components analysis, and those components with high loadings were included in the analysis, okay? And then they created 2 general linear models using these quality of life scores and all the variables that they had. And they basically sorted through these to make sure they were looking at the ones that were meaningful. And they removed non-significant factors through a step called backwards elimination. And interactions that were relevant were actually checked for significance and included in the model where they were found. And then they had an a priori just 0.05 significance level. So that means that they didn't look at all the data because all of the data didn't meet these requirements. So they were trying to be conservative. And then they collected free text responses. This was a heck of a lot of work. Okay, so, and now I'm trying to convince, this is the problem with the pointer. There we go. Okay, so when they looked at, at the problem behaviors reported by pet guardians, these are the things that they found. So 47.5% or 755 people reported that the cat scratched the furniture. There was aggression during play, 40.2% of the time. Aggression towards unknown cats, 36.6% of the time. Anxiety not defined, 26.6%. Aggression towards familiar household cats, 26.6%, which tells you that these cats go outside because of the unknown cat versus known cat. Aggression towards unknown animals, a little less. Urinating outside a litter box, 19.5% of the time. Sucking on material. Boy, you know, I always wonder if these are these early weaned cats or distressed cats or OCD cats, but 15.4%. So they had a couple of hundred of these. I mean, you could have mined these data for lots of other things. Aggression towards household members being the humans, 10.7%. They had pica, which is the ingestion of non-nutritive substances, at 12.9%. That's interesting because that's higher than you see in a clinical population. Defecating outside the litter box, 10% almost. Aggression towards unknown people, only 8.1%. Spraying, 4.2%. And urinating or defecating on furniture, 3.7%. 59 lucky cats in that category. Okay, oh, come on. We may have to do without the pointer. There we go. Okay, so if we look at this, okay, this is the results of the ANOVA where they did all of the getting rid of the non-significant stuff. And if you take a look at this, so they've grouped these into cat playfulness, and that turned out to have a significant effect on quality of life score. And then they have the total games played, that had a significant effect. Housing, whether it was outdoor or exclusively indoor, had a significant effect. Cat age had a significant effect, and as expected, younger cats are a little more playful. And cat health issues had a significant effect, which isn't all that surprising. Really loving this. There we go. Guardian reported cat behavior changes when play was withheld were looked at. And one of the things they found was that cats asked for more attention. And I think that that also is something that came up when we talked about cats during the pandemic. One of the things people noticed is that cats asked for attention. Well, they were around to be asked. So if you withdrew the play, there was increased attention-seeking behavior, increased vocalization. Some of these cats became reclusive. There was increased destructive behavior, undefined, increased aggressive behavior. They appeared grumpy. Not sure what that means. They were a little more restless. They spent more time sleeping. They might bring toys to guardians, but that was a lower number. Cats with the zoomies, and they would redirect the playfulness to household cats. And again, a very, very small number. More likely to interrupt guardians' sleep time, it was only 2.8%. And I have to say, I'm a little surprised about that because that's something people complain about. So when you finally manage to look at this, what they concluded at the end of this study was cat guardianship scores were in fact related to the amount and quality of daily play. Quality of life varied with cat playfulness, and the number of games cat played and was positively associated with both of those. Behavior problems that loaded onto a PCA axis for stress correlated with quality of life. So lower quality of life, more behavior problems. And you have to remember this is correlational study. We don't know if early and ongoing intervention with play changes behavioral outcomes, but you could, based on this study, start a cohort study where you followed animals over time and you gave them various amounts of controlled play. But if there is a mechanism here, if this is driven mechanistically by play, it would suggest that quality of life is an essential thing for most cats. That quality of life and cat playfulness is highly correlated, and that in terms of quality of life for most cats, play really matters. Okay. This is a paper from Applied Animal Behavior Science. Now, that was a survey, and there's a method to my madness here. This is a survey, but it involves home videos. And what I'm trying to do here is set up the different ways we assess cat behavior, because I'm always driven nuts by surveys because I'm not sure what people mean. And this is a common problem in surveys. People maybe, if they just volunteer for them, they may be enthusiastic, and that may be a different group of people than would walk in the door with problems. And everybody always knows opportunistic surveys may have a bias. But what do people really tell you, and what are they watching? And that's what this study asks. So what do they tell you and what do they see? And this examined the reliability of caregiver reporting by comparing survey answers with behaviors observed in home videos collected after the surveys were completed. And they looked at an occurrence of 5 cat-cat interactions, which were predefined, and they were meant to be crystal clear. Head rubbing, allo grooming, sleeping in physical contact with each other, tail up greetings, and social play. And allo grooming is where you groom the other cats. So these were things that everybody who was involved in the study agreed people should be able to tell the difference of. The people who participated in the study were told about the differences. They should have been able to identify these things. And they looked at 42 two-cat households. There were 210 survey answers and 775 videos. So here was the ethogram. The head rubbing is the cat rubs the head against the other cat. Allo grooming, the cat licks the fur of another cat's head or body. Sleeping together, they make body contact while the cats are sleeping. tail up greeting, the tail is held in an upright position by both or one cats when they're lying or sitting next to each other. And social play was defined as behaviors that included wrestling, pawing, chasing, without any agonistic vocalizations, so no hissing, which is spelled wrong in this paper. Isn't that interesting? Growling, the editor in me is like, oh, you're missing an S. Growling, snarling, spitting, howling. And this doesn't include object play. They deliberately took out things like tail chasing or purely aggressive interactions. Okay. So now their question is, where do we go from here? And what did people find out? So here's a matrix that compares caregiver survey reports with behavioral observation. And the total sum of 210 refers to the 42 caregiver reports across 5 interactions. And the grayscaling represents the distribution of data so that darker gray areas are bigger data groups. So if you look at the interaction was reported by the caregiver and the interaction was in the videos, that was 99. The interaction was reported in the caregiver by the caregiver, but it wasn't observed in the videos. Whoa, baby, hallucinations, 31. The caregiver answered, I don't know, and the interaction was observed 4 times. And they answered, I don't know, and it wasn't observed 6 times. So that's actually pretty good, because you may not, unless you do this all the time, and unless you decide you're going to call this a sit and that a stand, you're going to have some problems here. Interaction was not reported by the caregiver, but was in the video 16 times. And it was not reported by the caregiver, and it was not in the video 54 times. So there are some discrepancies here. And when you look at these, they looked at conservative and broad sense false negatives with negative predictive value or false omission rates for these tests. So let's look at the broad scale ones. They're not actually that different in this study, but we'll look at the broad scale ones in the interest of time. And when you look at the number of broad scale false negatives, for the head rub, there were 6, for allogrooming, there were 5, sleeping together 2, tail greeting 4, social play 3, and overall, you ended up with 20 of them. You get to true negatives, okay, the broad scale true negatives here, and number of conclusive answers is in this line, and that should add up to the total of 2010. And then when you look at the percentage of broad scale false negatives, the percentage negative predictive value, and the false omission rate, the negative predictive value tells you, you know, how faithfully can you believe this? So in the best case scenario, sleeping together, the negative predictive value of the test was 92.6%. So if it didn't occur, you could probably believe it. But this drops to 50% for tail greeting. It's 62.5% for social play. For allogrooming, it's 64.3%. People aren't doing a great job of measuring what their cat's doing in this study. And that's the problem. So when you look at how well you can rely on what they don't see and what they do see, there are real problems. And negative predictive values really have to be looked at, because if it's not there, you have to be able to believe it. And in this case, the only time they could really recognize it well was when the cat was asleep. And that one, everybody had great faith in. So, first study, a survey study. Second study, a crossbred hybrid study. The third study is a synchronous citizen science study. And this actually won the Journal of Veterinary Behavior's Pet Welfare Award this year. So that's an award that the board of editors votes on. Every paper is self-selected. People identify that they want to be considered for this. This is real money. This is over $1,000 just in cash to use as you wish or put in your research fund. And we get 3 reviews for every paper. I drop the lowest score, sum the other 2 together, take the average. There you go. We rank them. There's your winner. So these people were well aware that during the pandemic, we could not do a lot of things. So what they thought we could do is everybody could set up a video that the researchers could watch while the clients did the provocative test. And I love this. Now you're limited in what you can do, and this was a pilot study. But they looked at two types of data that owners could help them collect. They played with a wand toy while they were on camera, and they fed the cat in a very specific way while they were on camera, and the researchers could watch this and they could record this. So how they were going to do this was deeply discussed and provided the day before data collection. For data collection, the owner and cat engaged in these in a randomized order. Only one cat in each household participated. All data were collected from the video call that was prearranged after informed consent and everything. And the concerns before starting were, will the quality of videos actually be good enough for us to be able to see anything if you're using a laptop or a smartphone? Because most of us are pretty fussy. And, you know, I much prefer really good video cameras, even though I'm sure my iPhone now probably does as well detail-wise. Image and sound quality were not exceptional, and it was possible to analyze the cat's behavior using both an ethogram developed for the study and the Boris behavioral automated data analysis software. So that worked out pretty well. Will the researcher's voice giving instructions to the clients be intrusive? It wasn't, but people had done a lot of Zoom calls by that time so that the cats had seen people talking to a box and seemed to be okay. So after the initial pilot, there was a focus on the first three pilots was predominantly on the cat. They added the owner's face in so that they could see if the owner was encouraging the cat. And they wanted to be able to see their arm when they held out the toy and what their face was doing. And this required a little bit of rearranging. The meal was originally presented in 10 seconds. Then it was shortened to 3 to 5 seconds because the cats really didn't stay interested. It's a cat. It's a cat on video. 10 seconds is forever. And the participants were asked to hold the stimuli with an outstretched arm to see if the cat was actually looking at the human. So this is how they did this. And they were able to code a great number of videos from a great number of behaviors from the video. And they looked at the frequency in events per interval and the duration in seconds. So they could look at the number of meows. This is 5 cats, guys. Don't get so excited. It's 5 cats. But gazing at the feeder, the duration in seconds. So one cat looked at the feeder for 25.49 seconds. How often did they lick at their own mouth? How long do they sit still? How long do they walk? I'm wondering how long it's going to take me to reach out and strangle one of my dogs since they've decided this is the time when they'll act up, because after all, I'm preoccupied. How frequently they meow. So they had a very vocal cat here, which was interesting because it was also a very active cat. And how long they spent gazing at a toy. One cat really seemed to really like the toy. And there were a couple of cats in here where you look at this and you go 0, 0, 0, 0. Not all cats are suited for these types of studies. How long did they sit still and how long did they walk around? So they were actually able to get some pretty great data from this. And they said, you know, with some refinements and a couple of cameras, we might be able to do quite well. Okay, now, so there were 3 studies about how do we study cat behavior. Survey study, a survey and video study that basically said, ooh, even when we define stuff well and we pick common behaviors, there are problems. And a study that said, what if we directed them and interacted with them and did this long distance where we're not part of the data set? And that actually turned out to be much better than expected, but it's going to be labor intensive and you will be limited by this. This is what we're limited by. Okay, so for those of you in the audience who are veterinarians, veterinary technicians, or work in shelters or help out in shelters, this is a very, very, very nice paper that was in JAVMA this past year, and it looked at whether or not giving gabapentin daily improved behavior modification progress and decreased stress in shelter cats that came from horrible environments involved in hoarding. And it was a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study, music to my ears. It was a well-done study. And I always get, I'm so happy when these are done. It just matters to me. It's as much work or more work to do a poorly designed study as it is to do a well-designed study. So often my heart breaks when I look at these flawed studies that if somebody had helped out a little bit or they'd given it just a little bit more thought, you'd be in good shape. But this is a wonderful study. So as you know, there are more shelter cats than there are homes. And cats and dogs from hoarding situations are generally in terrible shape when they come into shelters. They may be well fed and well groomed. They may not be well fed and well groomed, but they're stressed out of their minds. These are very, very, very stressful situations. And when we had a hoarding situation here a few years ago, I'm still seeing some of the dogs from that time period. They were either completely bouncing off walls and couldn't interact or were shut down. And so many of them have come so far, but it's a very tough situation to put them in. So these were physically healthy cats. They were divided into two groups upon entry, placebo versus gabapentin. 10 milligrams per kilo of gabapentin in the intervention group. A low dose for us, we tend to go up to 20 for anxious cats and a little above sometimes. They analyzed by intention to treat. In other words, we want to make sure that you're okay, and per protocol. Per protocol, cats receive 75% of their doses. In other words, you had to receive a certain number to meet the protocol standard. Most cats graduated from behavioral mod protocol from 11 days. I'm going to show you the behavior mod protocol. The range for cats completing this was 4 days, which surprised me, to 51 days, which did not. These are cats from a hoarding situation. On the per protocol analysis, which is the more restrictive analysis, gabapentin was quicker for the behavior modification progression. So if you took gabapentin, your behavior modification progression was faster. You had a lower cat stress score. You had a shorter latency to emerge from your cage, and there was less urine suppression. In other words, you urinated normally. Perching and sleeping behaviors increased over time in this study, and hiding and lying down behaviors decreased over time in this study for treated cats. So let me show you what their flow chart looked like for how to decide who was going to do this. At intake, all cats received the exam and entered the shelter. They looked at cats that didn't enter the trial, and they had individual care according to shelter protocols. But cats who did meet the criteria started to receive the 10 milligrams of gabapentin per kilo every 12 hours. The daily study procedures were done, and they received between 1 and 4 behavior mod sessions. They had 3 cat stress score recordings. They scored them for latency to emerge from the box, and all their other behaviors using continuous video recording. They weighed the urine in the clumpable urine collected on days 1 through 3. Now, if the cat wasn't progressing, the cat was removed. Nobody wanted to make these cats miserable. And this is now a very common thing. Years ago, people didn't remove patients who weren't doing well. I think now it's written into all of our protocols. It's a much more humane way to do it, whether you're a human or a non-human. And the study completion, once the cat met the behavior modification step 6 for 3 consecutive sessions, the cat was graduated, and the gabapentin or the placebo treatment was stopped. And then the cat was adopted when medically suitable or euthanized for medical or behavioral reasons. And that didn't happen all that often, but it did happen. Okay, so here was the behavior mod for fearful cats. And the first thing they did was they wanted to make sure they had decent welfare criteria. Could they eat with somebody standing in the room with them? Could they take food from somebody's hands? Would they allow a very light touch without any real interaction? Would they allow you to pet and scratch them? And then would they seek attention without food being present? And they had a whole bunch of tips and tricks for how to do this. Now you can see that here's the nice purple line for the gabapentin for the cat stress scores, and here is the latency to emerge, purple line. And what's interesting here is the cat stress score goes down pretty continuously. latency to emerge has a little bit of a hump for the gabapentin, but not the placebo group, which is one of the reasons why you should go a long distance with these to see how this really shakes out. And you see that there's a difference in both cases at the end. The blue dots, as I said, are the placebo cats. The purple dots are the treatment cats. And this study is a study that finally showed that interaction between drugs and the rapidity with which you acquire behavior mod, which I think is actually pretty cool. Okay, sorry about my glitch. That was my fault, guys. So also for those of you who are veterinarians, I thought you might be interested in a study on how much money people make, because this is something that I think everybody asks when they think about, well, yeah, we're going to switch to a less distressing, decreased stressor, low fear to no fear way of doing things. And how much money is that going to cost us? Because that's how everybody thinks of it. So this is an article that looks at cat-friendly practices and standard practices and asks what's the difference in the income they generate. Now I'm going to show you the differences. So this is a cat-friendly practice cohort. That's what the CFP on the left is. And clinics with a cat-friendly practice designation, 1,052. And then on the right, you have the non-cat-friendly practice cohort with 5,000 clinics. They looked at, for the cat-friendly practice and the non-cat-friendly practice, they looked at active IDEXX accounts, and they used only 20% of the feline visits because there were 5,000 cats in the non-cat friendly practice. And they did the financial analysis on the available data. Then they matched the clinics by visit count, and then they compared the clinical findings. Okay, so this is another somebody who knew what they were doing designed this study. And again, when we look at this, what you can see here, they give you the data for 2018 and 2021. Now, these data in this slide represent the per visit revenue. So in 2018, the cat-friendly practice, which is the black, the per visit revenue was $203 compared to $169 in the non-cat friendly, $234 in the cat friendly practice versus $199 in 2021. If you look at the average revenue again in the different clinics, what you see here, sorry about that, is you see the same type of trend for diagnostic testing. This is for the first set of data are for clinical visits. The second set of data on the bottom are for diagnostic testing. Okay, so now let's look at the percentage of feline patients at any clinical visit and then at any wellness visit, which is what the bottom set of data are. So again, 2018 and 2021. And not only was there a pandemic in there, but you might expect that cat-friendly practices would have been around longer. More people have taken the courses, more people have bought into it and signed up. Maybe they would know more. And they looked at diagnostic tests, proportion of cats performed, again, at any clinical visit and at wellness visits. So at any clinical visit, you had more diagnostic tests performed in the cat-friendly practice in either year than you did in a non-cat-friendly practice. And in wellness visits, surprisingly enough, it was a big gap. So those patterns held no matter whether it was a wellness visit or a clinical visit. And then if you look at the per cat revenue, the top line again, 2018, 2021 is any type of clinical visit. And then the average revenue for any type of diagnostic testing is on the bottom. And in each of these, you see that no matter which way you look at these data, the per cat revenue for visits or diagnostic testing is higher in feline-friendly practices. Now, it's entirely possible that the people who seek out feline-friendly practices are more willing to spend money on their cats. But the point is, nobody's losing money. And I think that that's really important because even if what we're doing is we're skimming the cream here, you've got a few hundred feline-friendly practices compared to 5,000 non-feline friendly practices. Even if we're just skimming the cream, there's a learning curve here. And if you're in a situation where you're willing to get your cats early care, which is what feline-friendly practices encourage, over your revenue stream, you'll generate more income, but possibly not over the cat's lifespan. In other words, if they get better early care, this might be a cost savings for their people because they spend more on preventative things. And that analysis is not included in this. But one of the things that this could go towards is preventing people from feeling they have to euthanize a treatable cat because they don't have the money. So pay attention. We're not losing money when we're kind. Okay, we are going to switch to dogs. And the first dog we're going to talk about is a comparison between dog and wolf. Okay, we're going to talk about brain size in dogs. And this is really about dogs. It's not really about wolves, but there is a wolf comparison in here. And the question is as follows. This is a paper in the journal Evolution, and it's by people who are interested in evolutionary biology, and also Enrico Cubini, who is a dog biologist. So, somebody who's interested in dog behavior. And the question here is, look, we know from all this cognitive literature, dogs can follow a lot of cues. They can follow some pretty complex testing paradigms. They've lived with us intimately. Everybody talks about coevolution or convergent evolution for many of these traits. We know that dogs share genes for neoplasia and metabolism and digestion and neurochemistry with humans that no other species shares. Are domestic dog brains bigger? And does that go with breed? So have we experienced a shift in dog breeds? And what the authors say, and I can improve on their verbiage, so I didn't. What the authors say is as follows. We predicted that breeding regimes favoring complex phenotypes to fulfill particular functions, and they mean like herding, or to have a particular life history characteristic may have consequences for brain size evolution in dogs. To test our prediction regarding function, we used a phylogenetic mix model to determine whether breeds listed in different AKC groups had different relative mean brain sizes or different allometric relationships. To test our predictions about life history traits, we checked whether longevity and litter size, those are life history traits, were associated with brain size in a model that controlled for body size, head shape, common ancestry, and gene flow. These guys did their homework. Here's where the wolf comes in. Okay, so they looked at, and this first graph is within species allometric regression of brain volume in wolves and dogs. And what you see is there's a slightly sharper slope. There's a more steep slope to dogs. Dogs and wolves do overlap. You're seeing that, and if I can get my pointer to cooperate, I'll be able to show you this. Dogs and wolves do overlap. You'll see this here, but there is a more rapidly rising slope for dogs. There's a lesser slope for wolves. Wolves don't seem to be going anywhere. Dogs maybe, but if you look at the volume of the brain and the body mass, the volume of the brain in dogs fairly closely maps onto body mass. Okay, so that may not suggest that different dogs who have different jobs or different life histories have bigger brain sizes. It just may suggest that it's a size relationship. So it's not a relative change based on what you do. Now, if you look at the individual wolves as individual wolves and dogs as breeds, okay, that's a little different. These are pairwise comparisons of absolute brain size in each of the two species. And they paired the individual wolf with the dog breed that was most like it in size. And in many of these comparisons, brain volume was no different. But when there was a difference, the wolves had slightly larger brain volume more often than not, and there were a few exceptions for that. So this is what they were looking at. There's a collection of these dog skulls apparently in Hungary at the university, and they basically constructed the volume of the brain case. And these were the measurements they took, and they used CT images to calculate the volumes. And they looked at different shapes of skulls and all of the different patterns that go with breeds. And when they looked at, and if you look at relative brain size here, so at 0, there's really no difference, and then increase and decrease size. And you'll see that they have different shapes to how variable they are, but these are not really that tremendously different. So toys aren't that different from non-sporting, aren't that different from working, not that different from hound, terrier, herding, sporting dogs. That don't forget that these box and whiskers plots, you're looking at the bottom half of 25% of the distribution and the top half of 75% of the distribution. So these are all pretty similar. And when they look at the allometric relationships and compare them between and within groups, what you see here is that toy dogs do have a slightly different relationship than, for example, herding dogs, which is this red line. So they don't have the same intercept and they don't have quite the same slope. But really, if you take out the toy dogs, where we have shrunk them and not shrunk their brains so much, pretty much everybody falls in line. Okay, they're all variants on a theme. And when you look at relative longevity, there's a small relationship. And when you look at litter size, there's a small relationship. So here's what they concluded. We found a modest increase in relative brain size since domestication, potentially caused by a social environment common to most dogs. And then they get to the meat of it. But there was really no association between functional categorization of dogs, breeds, and relative brain size. We propose that selection on behavioral features during breeding for functions such as hunting and herding has not been strong enough to change overall brain size in dogs in the absence of selection from predation, foraging, and mate choice. Now, let me stop there because this is an important sentence. We, as owners, have relieved the effects of selection by predation, foraging, and mate choice. But what they're up against here is modern breeds are only a couple of 100 years old. Dogs are thousands of years old. Selection still is acting for predation, foraging, and mate choice, even though we don't really let the dogs make their decisions about any of those things anymore, which in terms of predation may be a good thing. You'd have to ask the dogs about mate choice. But what they're saying is that that's the background against which a breed is operating, and nothing we've done is enough to overcome that. There is nothing about work in dogs showing up here. We also find it plausible that some brain regions respond to selection. This is a gem. But effects in different areas may compensate for each other in terms of size. Yes, but maybe not in function. And that's what functional MRI and imaging is eventually going to tell us. And I'm hoping we're going to get to do some of that here. And I'm hoping that I see more and more groups doing this. We suggest that future studies in the field of brain evolution in dogs should focus on changes acting on particular brain regions to uncover potential links between brain morphology and other traits, and with pathologies, and with your ability to inhibit your behaviors, and with your ability to discern different relationships and to be supranormal. There are all sorts of things you could look at here. But given the fabulous work out of Kathleen Perman's lab last year on looking at links in dogs that have GAD with the amygdala, the hippocampus, and overactive frontal cortex in functional MRI, we need to start paying attention to this, because you don't need to have a brain volume change to have these functional changes. And then finally, the authors say, we also suggest that the strongest selection pressures on cognitive abilities in wild populations, predation, foraging, mate choice, within and between species social interactions, are necessary to yield large enough changes in brain morphology for changes in brain size to be detected. There are two really important concepts in that paragraph. And I don't know these authors, but they did just a fantastic job. The strongest selection pressures on cognitive abilities. They just did something that many veterinarians still are not willing to do. They said, you know what? Dogs are cognitive, wolves are cognitive. And you know how you see that cognition being used? In how they avoid predation, in how they forage, in how they choose their mates, and in how they interact with other species. And the implication here is that we could be measuring those cognitive patterns, and we're not doing it. And then they point out that those are Darwinian survival skills. And for you to have a large enough brain change, you would have to have a profound change in those things that keep you alive and functioning. And that hasn't happened. So a very cool study that has nothing to do with medicine, but clients will be interested in this because they're always interested in, are herding dogs smarter because they have bigger brains? Maybe they should ask the question if herding dogs as a group are smarter and decide how they're going to evaluate that. But across these breeds, and there's a big size range, there's not as much variation as you would think. And while there has been some change in the past couple of 100 years, it gets a little swamped by the variation. So I think it's a very cool paper. This is an excellent paper. And as I said, I'm not going to talk about very many dog papers, but this is an excellent paper. This was in Journal of Veterinary Behavior. What makes this an excellent paper? These people looked at behavior problems in dogs. They looked at prevalence. They looked at risk, and they did something that only one other group of people have ever done. They used a representative population sample. They went to Statistics Denmark to draw for their population. There are only 2 studies, including this one, that have done this. They assessed the problem type and frequency, and they said, here's the problem. Every study asks different questions. We've had standardized questionnaires that are objective for years, and they're not suitable to many of the average dogs, but, they are great for telling you about specific behaviors. But most people ask different types of questions. The most accurate estimate of prevalence, which is what occurs over a defined time period, is going to be in a representative sample where you've eliminated as many biases as possible. When they got this sample that was representative of the population, they ended up with 507 Danish dog owners who were willing to participate. They emphasized that the study would be improved by information that was more specific about behaviors and frequencies, stuff we collect, because again, they're back to number 1. It really depends on the questions you asked. And this is the whole point of science. And their take-home message was something that should spook people. Veterinarians should be screening dogs and ensuring that veterinary care is not contributing to early fear. And I'll show you how they got there. Okay. So when they looked at the overview of dog owner and management related variables, you had broad scale aggression problems, broad scale fear problems, and broad scale what they called disobedience problems. And there were 485 dogs with aggression problems, 40 dogs with fear problems, and 478 with disobedience problems. There were only 507 dogs in the study. Very few perfect dogs. And when you look at things that were associated, these are the variables they studied. And when you look at the things that were associated with aggression problems or reports of aggression problems, which may not be diagnoses, be very careful here, those of you who are interested in behavioral diagnostics. This is what they're saying. We didn't do that. We looked at broad scale things. A chronic disease within the past year would have resulted in a report of an aggression problem. Off-leash time on walks was associated with frequency of aggression problems. And if you had more off-leash time, you had a decreased frequency of aggression problems. And training with the dog at home associated with frequency of aggression problems. And if you trained, you had a decreased frequency. Fear, acute disease within the last year, made you more likely to have fear problems. Pay attention, veterinarians. Housing. was associated with fear problems. And this is a space concern. And participation in training class was associated with the prevalence of fear problems, and you had a decreased prevalence if you went to class. Disobedience was associated with dog age, and I don't think anybody's surprised that younger dogs are viewed as more disobedient. Off-leash time in interaction with conspecifics was associated with disobedience, and I'm going to show you a blow up of these data. And again, training at home with the dog was associated with disobedience. So if you had more time with other dogs and you had more time training, you were less likely to have these problems. So when they looked at the share of dogs with aggression problems across these three variables, you saw that if you had it, 20% of these dogs had a chronic problem. Less often than daily, you would have had more problems if you had off-leash walks, but if you had daily leash walks, this drops. And if you trained in the home daily, this drops to a very low level. So this is advice we should all be giving clients. If you look at dogs with a share of problems related to disobedience across the variables that were significant, dog age, the older you got, the less disobedient you were. Wonder if that's true for humans. Okay, if you look at off-leash time, the more off-leash time you had, if you got it daily, you were less disobedient. You had more freedom. And if you trained with the dog at home, you were perceived as less disobedient. And finally, if we look at fear, acute disease within the last year, 25% of the dogs that had acute disease were perceived as fearful. That's a big deal. If you lived in a small space, like an apartment or a dorm with the dog, they were viewed as more fearful. If you live in a rural area or on a very large piece of property, dogs are less fearful. And believe it or not, this is something I talk about with our clients when they have fearful dogs. If they live in an urban environment, it is harder to protect the dog from stimuli. They will be triggered more often. You can accidentally worsen that problem. Where if you live in the middle of nowhere, they're triggered less frequently, and you can work harder to get them better under more controlled circumstances. And, you know, the dog I took this summer who's pathologically neophobic, I attribute a large chunk of her improvement simply to the fact that she's living in a quiet, rural place where she can walk around on a large piece of land and not be interfered with and learn to become herself with her medication and her treatment. And she has a great set of dog models. If you participate in training classes multiple times, you rarely have fear. Okay, so what were the summary of the causal factors? And remember that the correlational factors, remember these aren't causal. So no causal conclusion should be drawn here. This is an associational study. Apartment compared with larger property increased fear. And this is the one I want to highlight because I don't think we're paying attention to it. And we see this in the clinic every week. Illness and injury requiring veterinary care in the past year increases fear and aggression. Lack of opportunity for off-lead dog walks increases aggression and disobedience, and lack of training at home or in a class increases fear, aggression, and disobedience in a correlational way. Does that mean that if you have training, you will not have a disobedient, fearful, or aggressive dog? No, it does not, and that would take a prospective study, and that would take a great graduate student, but they have set you up for this, and you could do this. Okay. The last two papers I want to talk about, the one has to do with seized dogs, and it's out of the Netherlands. And the last one I want to talk about is going to circle right back to COVID-19. And this is a great study from the group at Utrecht University, and they looked at dogs seized due to bites to animals or humans. They had previously published some of this data in the Journal of Veterinary Behavior and a couple of other places, and those data were from 2008, 2009, and 2010. They've got 3 years of new data using the same format, and they looked at the patterns of behavior and social and environmental factors in these dogs that bite. Now, in the Netherlands, if you are a dog and you get involved in one of these tragic bites, you have to have an evaluation by the behavior specialists. So when you look at the factors studied, they looked at things associated with the household, including some tragic things. Were the children placed in care? Was there abuse? Is there criminal offense? Is there domestic violence? Are there financial issues? Is there assistance provided? Is the living situation adequate? Is there mental illness or substance abuse? These are mitigating factors. They look at owner antisocial behavior. Was the dog used as a weapon? Does the dog roam without the owner? Is there a noise disturbance? Is there a previous mention of a confiscated dog? Do they use a short lead muzzle obligation? Was this a requirement? How about the husbandry? Who takes care of these dogs and what's going on with care task transfer? Are there illogical explanations of this being play? Are there multiple dogs in the household, and how did they get this dog? And then they look at animal treatment factors. What's the body condition score? How is the dog housed? Are they isolated? Do they have access to clean food and water? Do they have access to daylight? Do they have old scars? This is always something I check for when I'm asked to comment on a dog who may have fought or been in an abuse or hoarding situation. Do they have parasites? And believe it or not, I'm so anxious about this that I often have people shave the dog so I can see it better. I don't want to miss something. Physical punishment, skin coat or nail issues. Are their nails brittle and really worn down to the nubs? Was there suspected abuse? Is it an unclean environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then when they looked at this, what they found was that, first of all, their cases from 2008 to 2010 mirrored each other. So that's good. So they were able to combine both time frames, which is nice. And the things that turned out to be significant are in black. And I'm going to go through them for you. Short leash, muzzle obligation for this or a previous dog. Highly significant with this dog biting somebody. So these are repeat offenders. Substance abuse, highly significant. Antisocial behaviors by the humans, highly significant. These are all human issues, people. Body condition score too low. No animal chooses to have a low body condition score. Highly significant. Owner living situation and financial issues, highly significant. Noise disturbances reported, highly significant and will make the dogs crazy. Skin coat, nail issues, a reflection of care, highly significant. Dog's environment is unclean, highly significant. No access to clean food and water, highly significant. And a previous dog was involved in an incident or confiscated. So these are the issues that ended up influencing which dogs were seized for bites to humans, tragic bites to humans or other animals. And they basically note that the worrisome dog ownership factors point to societal risks of biting incidents as well as animal welfare risks. The involved dogs are as much victims as they are culprits. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. We're so quick to blame the dog, and we never ask how they got there. We indicate that studying effectiveness of an array of measures to prevent biting incidents is urgent, and in recent years, a near quarter of cases involve leash muzzle obligations without preventing a new bite incident. In other words, what we're doing isn't enough. The people are doing the obvious thing, but they're not fixing the problem. And a fifth of owners displayed antisocial behaviors. And they note going through this that not everybody will be able to comply without treatment, and that treating the owners is as important as getting the dogs out. And finally, I just want to circle back to one thing we did not discuss in any of the previous papers about COVID. And Nwako Ogata, who's a friend of mine and a specialist in veterinary medicine, chose to take on loneliness in humans and asked whether cats and or dogs relieved personal human loneliness. And they looked at 4 phases: the pre-pandemic, the lockdown, the reopening, and the recovery. It's a survey study. They had 4,237 participants, 657 non-pet owners, 1,761 dog owners, 1,819 cat owners, and they completed between 1 and 6 surveys. And let me show you how they did this. Again, they used the relationship scales that we've been talking about through this series of talks. They had a scale that looked at different degrees of closeness that people felt to their pets. They had a perceived stress scale for the humans, and they had an emotional and loneliness scale for the humans. And they combined all of these scales to get data. And this is the perceived stress scale, how stressed the humans feel. And this is loneliness for family, loneliness for social people, and romantic loneliness. In other words, I don't have enough, I don't have romance in my life, I don't have a partner, I don't have an extended social network because of these events, and I'm missing family, and your perceived stress scale. So interestingly enough, the black is dog in these lines, the orange is nothing, what happens if you don't have a pet, and the blue is cats. And the highest stress scale are the people who have cats, which is, don't know how to interpret that. But if you look at, did the pet alleviate social loneliness? Cats really didn't. They came in right about as not having anything, but dogs did. And if you look at familial loneliness, cats weren't any different than having nothing, but dogs were. And if you look at romantic loneliness, cats are worth their weight in gold, as are dogs. So our relationships with our animals are important, and they may not always be what they seem, but very few people actually talk about how lonely they are. And it's an epidemic worldwide. And these are data from the pandemic. My guess is they would generalize to daily life. And maybe there need to be more cat cafes or facilitated ways for people to have pets where they can help be cared for if people aren't able to do it. There's a lot here. There's a lot in every one of these studies. And they noted that the temporal changes in the stress score were small. The largest decrease was from lockdown to recovery, which makes sense. Cat owners consistently reported the highest levels of stress. Dog owners decreased all types of loneliness. And there was a positive but subtle trend if you lump all of these. And with cats, it was largely the romantic part of it. Again, if you want to reach me, these are my email addresses. If you would like to have a patient go to the behavior clinic, this is the address. We do distance consultations through veterinarians, and this is where you'll find information about that. This is the journal, and we had some papers from it. Behavior at the Beach is in June this year. It will be in June next year. I think we have 1 or 2 slots right now. We may or may not have them. I think we may have them. But you can also go to my website for any handouts. And I'll stop. And I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I hope you enjoyed this series. I found it absolutely fascinating. And as always, I find what's in the literature and how people are thinking about this just illuminating. I never cease to be energized by how curious people are. And I think if you're curious, you get to live a long, happy, and quite complicated life.
Thanks, Karen. Again, that was a super interesting collection of studies, and I really was fascinated by the COVID study on
Loneliness.
Yeah, I think that was really. I think it was a nice end actually to the series as we tried to focus on
Yeah.
the impacts of COVID, not just on our companions, cats and dogs, but also on us as people and our relationships.
Yeah, it's cool. I see there's a question.
Well, comment that this was
Oh,
fascinating.
comment
Thanks
from
for doing
Michelle.
this.
You're welcome, Michelle. But yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And you know, I also when I went back and I looked at those cat studies where you do a survey, you do a survey video study and check the survey data, and then you see if you can do a collaborative video study. I'm like, we always worry about how much we get wrong as scientists and whether our data are representative. And you look at that and you think, ooh, if we really want to know about behavior, we're going to have to start really paying attention to behavior.
Yep. I think the citizen science paper was really neat too. And
Well, that was such a cool paper, and I was so surprised actually when it won the welfare award. But the comments were things like, boy, if people did this, we could improve welfare. And I was tickled with that. It got a super high score, and the people who reviewed it loved it.